Thank you for participating in this track entitled Taking Advocacy into Our Own Hands, Social Work Students and Social Justice. As a reminder, we encourage you to share your questions and comments in the chat. So every year, the senior cohort in the social work program at the University of Guam engages in legislative and cause advocacy as members of the Social Work Student Alliance to address social inequality and promote social justice in our communities. This year, students will discuss their work with Russian asylum seekers on preserving indigenous rights and environmental justice at Litexan, homelessness in Guahan, and on the challenges of Bill 1236 to expand the castle doctrine. And now I will read a short, brief bio of the entire group. The University of Guam BSW senior cohort actively advocates for social justice in their senior year at the social work program. This is consistent with their purpose as Social Work Student Alliance members to promote student involvement and to provide input to support for meaningful social work education and to participate in developing an awareness of social problems and or social barriers. Tressa P. Diaz, Dr. Diaz, is the assistant professor at the Division of Social Work and is advising and evaluating them in their projects. All right, so we'll go ahead and begin. Our first presentation will be about Russian asylum seekers.
Afide. I am Ruel Drillon, and along with my colleagues Kelsey Mofnas, Leah Showalter, Ellerin William, Larissa Talavera, Raisa Flores, and Carmelu Pasana, we are pleased to present our advocacy project on the Russian asylum seekers, A Rough Road to Freedom.
What is asylum? Asylum is a protection granted to foreign nationals either already in the United States or arriving at the border who meet the international law definition of a refugee. And there are two paths towards asylum, one being defensive asylum, which are for individuals who are in the removal proceedings after being apprehended in the U.S. or at a U.S. port of entry without proper legal documentations or in violation of their immigration status. Another path is affirmative asylum, which are for individuals who are not in the removal proceedings. These individuals must prove they were persecuted or in fear of persecution due to their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group.
Russian nationals entered Guam through a visa waiver program which was granted in 2009 by the Obama administration. The waiver allowed for a 45-day stay, however, some Russians used it as an opportunity to seek asylum and file their applications. However, in 2019, the Trump administration ended the waiver as part of their immigration reform passage. As a result, the application reviews, which are done in California, then became delayed because of the changes and other process issues. The end result is that Russian asylum seekers are still waiting for their applications to be processed. As a signatory to the 1967 protocol and through U.S. immigration law, the United States has legal obligations to provide protection to those who qualify as refugees. The Refugee Act established two paths to obtain refugee status, either from abroad as a resettled refugee or in the United States as an asylum seeker.
Key points related to the cause are basic human rights, lack of due process, and status of application. Starting with basic human rights. Asylum is about human rights and social justice. Two of the basic human rights are the right to equality and freedom from discrimination, and the right to life, liberty, and personal security. Moving on to the lack of due process. This was an issue mentioned during our meeting with immigration lawyers. Due process is the legal requirement that the state must respect all legal rights that are owed to a person. As long as they are on Guam, they are denied due process because Guam does not have any asylum attorneys, asylum courts, or an adjudicator on island. Next, we have status of application. In this slide, it shows the steps for asylum seekers to become asylees. The first step is to arrive in the U.S., and the next is to apply for asylum. The Russian asylum seekers have accomplished steps 1 and 2. They are currently stuck on step 2 as they have not received an acknowledgement of their application or a notice to visit an application support center for fingerprinting. Going back to the lack of due process, they are unable to be processed here because we do not have the infrastructure to do so. An adjudicator usually comes to Guam once every 2 to 3 years, however, there hasn't been one for a few years. It is their legal right to leave as asylum seekers, however, they are unable to do so due to various barriers.
Hello everyone, my name is Leah Showalter and I will be speaking about the key points related to our cause. Some of these key points include health, homelessness, lack of public support and awareness, and the hunger strike. Regarding health, the Russian community on Guam faced unique health challenges due to the climate here. Being from Russia, they are not used to the extreme heat and they have had difficulty with adjusting to the environment on Guam. Not only have they faced physical health issues, but mental health issues as well. They have shared with us that a member of their community did commit suicide due to the stress of their situation and everything that they are dealing with. Regarding homelessness, this community does have a risk for homelessness. While interviewing some of them, we learned that some from their community are already experiencing homelessness. Many of them are seeking shelter and housing at beaches. For lack of public support and awareness, our group believes that our community is not completely aware of their situation or what's going on. We believe many people on Guam don't even realize that we have Russian asylum seekers here on the island. So this was a big reason why our group decided to do this project. At the end of the day, it was about showing up for them and showing support and letting them know that they aren't alone. And we also just wanted to be able to spread awareness and educate the public on the issues that this community is facing. And lastly, we have the hunger strike. We learned from posts in the media and also from the Russian asylum seekers website that they would be participating in a hunger strike starting on March 1st. So this was something that really caught our attention. And after speaking with the Russian community, we learned that they felt they just really needed to do a hunger strike because they felt it was their only way to get their voices heard in the community. The hunger strike did last for 11 days. It was recently suspended on March 11th. So these are just a couple of the key points that are related to our cause and some of the work that we are trying to do to spread awareness. Thank you.
For this cause advocacy project, we came up with our short-term or immediate goals, intermediate goals, and long-term goals. For our short-term advocacy goals, we aim to organize a student advocacy team, understand and prioritize advocacy issues, and increase public response and education about these asylum seekers. We had already completed our short-term goals as we are the student advocacy team. We have done research and gathered data to further our understanding on the issues at hand and have increased public awareness and education through different media outlets. For our intermediate goals, we aim to help the asylum seekers access support services and to assist them in accessing other healthcare services. For our long-term goals, we aim to have the asylum applications approved, which will allow them to travel to the mainland United States.
Collaborative strategies and tactics. Recognizing that the success of our advocacy efforts depended heavily on our cohesiveness as a team, our first strategy was to organize ourselves by establishing set meeting times and assigning specific roles and responsibilities. This allowed our research strategy to efficiently perform historical and social analysis and effectively obtain first-hand knowledge of the seeker's situation by speaking with them directly and to those they interacted with. Reviewing media reports and public reactions served as a gauge which we would use as a tool at a later time to evaluate our efforts. Lastly, our strategy of creating a summarization of issues empowered the seekers to prioritize so we could create more meaningful and effective campaign strategies. Campaign strategies and tactics. Our strategy to increase community awareness and improve public response started to take shape as we participated in a peaceful rally with positive messaging and dialoguing with local media on March 9, 2021. Additional tactics include creating media clips and conducting education presentations, which we hope to begin soon. We envision our strategy to improve accessibility to basic human services through dialogue with local agencies to establish a means to deliver services the seekers require such as temporary housing, access to non-government organizations for clothing and nourishment. We also will be approaching the appropriate legislative chairs to discuss options for healthcare and other critical services. Lastly, obtaining accurate expectations and reasonable timelines for application processing by engaging our congressmen and federal agency managers will provide a clearer picture of what must be planned at a local level to support the seekers in the meantime.
For this advocacy project, our main forum was the public arena. As previously mentioned, one of our short-term goals was to improve the public's response to the asylum seekers. As you will see in the upcoming slides, we had used this forum by sharing their stories on media platforms, and we had also conducted a peaceful rally with them. This was accomplished by spending time with the Russian asylum seekers, occasionally in person, to understand them and their situation more personally and accurately. With this vital piece of information, we were able to bring it to the public arena to share. One of the forums we would like to be able to use in the future is the Office of the Lieutenant Governor. We would like to contact him and discuss this issue further. As one of our short-term goals was to understand and prioritize the advocacy issues at hand, we also spoke with immigration attorneys regarding this advocacy cause. More recently, we had communicated with the Fanogi Coalition on our advocacy efforts to further educate the public. In addition, we had connected with other members of the Social Work Student Alliance, also known as SWASA, community social workers, and Drs. Chris and Svetlana Rasmussen.
The social work perspective on the cause are human rights, social justice, and dignity and worth of the person. Social justice, according to the NASW Code of Ethics, states that social change efforts are primarily on issues of poverty, unemployment, discrimination, and other forms of social injustice. Although it is difficult to advocate for their long-term goal, which is to freely roam the continental United States of America, we can advocate for them to find services that will aid them with shelter, food, clothing, and employment while awaiting the decision of their immigration status. Further advocacy steps may include a peaceful rally to further educate the public and a letter campaign to the Lieutenant Governor, Congressman, and Senator Talina Nelson, inquiring of any ideas or possible recommendations to assist with basic necessities and self-sufficiency, which may include medical assistant, English learner, tutor, or class, and job assistant. It has been noted that the plight of these asylum seekers has been rendered moot due to due process, and their stay here has been longer than anticipated.
Thank you for joining us for this presentation. We hope the information provided about the Russian asylum seekers was informative and inspiring. We are happy to take questions for the remaining time. However, you may also send an email to the address above, and we can arrange a time to address your questions more thoroughly. Please stay informed by visiting www.guamrefugees.com. On behalf of the entire team, thank you and stay safe.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. So go ahead and bring your comments and your questions down to the chat box so that these presenters can go ahead and answer your question. I also invite the presenters for this group to also turn on their videos and their mics so that they can answer the questions when they come up. I think your presentation and the information you provided is really important because, as you mentioned in it, not a lot of people know about the Russian asylum seekers. And I do have to admit myself that I was not really familiar with this issue until like fairly recently. You did mention that you did conduct interviews and you've spoken with these Russian asylum seekers. Since you have conducted that research, could you maybe share to the group or for anyone who's not too familiar about what they've been going through and their situation, since I know probably the situations are different depending on, yeah, it may be different depending on the person or stuff like that. So if you could please share, anyone's invited to answer.
Hi, thank you for your question. So my name is Leah. To answer your question, just, and you know, anyone else in the group can jump in as well. But some of the things that we did gather, like I mentioned in the key point section, with their health and healthcare, things like that. I think a lot of us, you know, we just think that, oh, like they're coming here, and we don't think about everything else in their different situations. Some of them have children, so they have to think about, you know, school for their kids or daycare or maybe teachers or tutoring. Some of them are disabled, for example, like in a wheelchair. So they have those specific needs that they would need met. Like I mentioned, the homelessness, they are at risk for that. Many of them already are living on the beach and in the park. And some of the other health concerns that they mentioned to us was just from the intense heat here. They would have like skin rashes, just not used to the climate. And then the mental health as well. Like I mentioned, they did have a member commit suicide just due to the situation that they're in. They also, you know, they have to think about financial. Not all of them have jobs or income. So it just depends on each of their individual situations. If some of them have spouses or children, so it just depends. They're all in different situations.
Okay, I'll just add a little bit. I mean, Leah gave a really great summary of the issues that they're facing, you know, in the social condition. And one of the challenges, right, is that because they're in their they're in this sort of limbo status, right? They aren't able to access, you know, a lot of social services, right? Because you know, they're not asylees at this time, right? So they're seekers, and typical to asylum seekers across the country, they're just not eligible to receive support, public support. What makes it different between here and in the United States, however, is that the United States, the mainland, has infrastructure that can help them with some of these services, right? So, you know, I'll give you an example, right? So California, right, which protects the Mexican border, right? You know, they have carved out financially, you know, somewhere in the area of $28 million, right, to put together infrastructure that will support them, whether it's for healthcare, whether it's for food and shelter, and they have that ability to support, that is true also for the other areas, protecting the you know, like the southern border, for example. Unfortunately, here on Guam, we don't have that infrastructure, and that's, you know, what makes it difficult in their case. And so, you know, that sort of adds to their situation, because even though they want to reach out, they don't have that outlet to reach out to. So, yeah.
All right, thank you for your response, Joel. Now I'm looking at the chat, and I do see that there's a question from Daniel Solis. He said, is there any legal ramification for the government by not processing their applications in a timely manner?
Yeah, no, there is not a legal ramification against the government. When it comes to, I mean, it's really complex, but let me just say it like this. When it comes to seeking the you know, asylum and getting approved, their applications approved, a lot of it is an issue of due process, right? So due process meaning that, you know, there is an established time that the government has stated based on, you know, treaties that we've ascension to, you know, and that number is 180 days, right, for applications to be processed. But, you know, should applications not be processed within 180 days, then there really is nothing that says, okay, well, then the government will, you know, do this, and this. and so, even though there is policy, sort of in place, it's a very difficult situation. And it's even more difficult now as we see what's happening in the mainland, with the new Biden administration, right? So that sort of complicates things because, the mainland's dealing with, 70,000 plus asylum seekers, right? So the 1 to 300 that's here in Guam, hard to kind of fit them in, right? So these are some of the major issues, unfortunately. And, important also to keep in mind that when they did come here, they did understand that, it's going to take 180 days to get our asylum squared away. And of course, obviously, that's not the case.
All right, thank you for your answer. For the sake of time, we don't really have time for more questions, but we have one more that I will ask for you guys. This is a question from Brianna Duenas. She says, Dr. Kim, the profound work you have done to push Guam towards inclusion speaks for itself. Your hard work never goes unnoticed. As a social work student, I'd like to ask, in what ways can service providers work with the LGBTQ community to ensure they are comfortable and recognized? Oh, I'm sorry. That's the incorrect. Sorry, that's the incorrect question. Just one moment. Okay. Okay. All right, here's the last question. Okay. So what are some things that you all as individuals in your group took away from this project in regards to working with vulnerable populations?
Okay, I can go ahead. For me, one thing is just with our social work core values, dignity and worth of the person, and then the importance of human relationships. Just us going there and just taking the time to sit with them and hear their stories and just sit there and talk to them and listen to them just as humans. In one of the photos from the rally, I was holding the sign that said we share a common humanity. So we're all humans, and so with that, I just really took away from that because they are a vulnerable population. So I just think I took away just the powerful and just the highlight of standing in solidarity and showing up to support someone and just to listen to them. So that's what I took.
All right, thank you very much. We'll just move on to the next presentation. So the next presentation will be called No Ground to Stand Upon, Expanding the Castle Doctrine.
Half a day, everybody. Today, my group will be presenting on No Ground to Stand Upon, Expanding the Castle Doctrine. Bill number 12-36 Core was introduced by Senator Joe S. St. Augustine, which is relative to expanding the castle doctrine justification for acts of self-defense and eliminating the requirement of retreating before the use of force in the face of imminent danger. A little history and summary of the bill. It was sponsored by Senator Joe St. Augustine and co-sponsored by Dennis G. Rodriguez by the first bill of 149-34 within the 34th legislature, following the latest two bills in the 35th and 36th legislature. The bill is to expand the current stand your ground castle doctrine, which is commonly known in the states as stand your ground law. There is no need to retreat and no duty to attempt to retreat or withdraw from a potential threat or as indicated in the bill while in reasonable fear of danger.
What is a castle doctrine law? Today's modern castle doctrine statutes have their origins in medieval English common law. At that time, English common law made a distinction between self-defense and defense of one's home. It stated that the law recognizes that individuals had a right to protect their home from an intruder or an unlawful attack. The term castle doctrine refers to legal statutes that explicitly protects an individual's right to use force to protect his or her home, i.e. a man's home is his castle, and person without necessarily having to retreat from the situation. Individuals whose circumstances meet certain requirements under these laws may be exempt from criminal prosecution, civil litigation, or both. Stand your ground versus duty to retreat. Stand your ground, you are legally allowed to use deadly force to defend yourself not only when at home workplace, or in an occupied vehicle, but also when the person is in a place where he or she has the right to be in, regardless of whether it is concluded that you could have safely avoided the risk of death by retreating, meaning you do not have to retreat. Duty to retreat, you are not legally allowed to use deadly force to defend him or herself if it is concluded that you could have safely avoided the risk of death or serious bodily injury, or the other relevant crimes by retreating with complete safety. In the US, 27 states and Puerto Rico currently have a stand your ground law. According to an Everytown research report made on stand your ground laws, this is a map of the current states that passed the stand your ground laws. And to the right is a list of 5 states that are considering repealing stand your ground laws today.
Here we have the arguments listed both in support and opposition. These arguments were gathered from previous testimonies and discussions with stakeholders and community members. The arguments in support of Stand Your Ground are that there are high crime rates on island and not enough police officers. Some stakeholders believe that the bill may deter crimes, and citizens may have a perception of feeling safer. For opposition, it is listed that the bill uses vague definitions. For example, it does not explain what constitutes reasonable fear. It also has the potential to be abused and lead to an increased risk of homicides and racially motivated crimes. There's no fair prosecution. Some stakeholders believe that the current Castle Doctrine law is sufficient enough for self-defense. Our advocacy goals. Our short-term goal is to research and gather information regarding the effects of Stand Your Ground laws nationwide, gather information about the limitations and constraints of the bill, as well as to communicate with stakeholders and members of the community via interviews and small forums. Our intermediate goal is to advocate against the bill by providing testimony in opposition to the bill at the public hearing. Our long-term goal is to prevent Bill 12-36 from passing.
Our strategies and tactics for this project included interviews from the community and stakeholders that allowed us to engage in dialogue about their understanding and opinions of Bill number 12-36. We also used research as we obtained and reviewed up-to-date and relevant information to gain better understanding and knowledge on our subject. It helped us to see the way the response and impact Stand Your Ground has on the community.
Use of a forum. My group members and I were able to schedule a via Zoom meeting with Senator Ridgell. Throughout our meeting with Senator Ridgell, he shared that his primary concern would be people thinking it's a green light to use force whenever, even when feeling slightly threatened. He found that negative impacts of the bill passing would include Guam becoming more of the Wild West, and with Stand Your Ground being abused to get away with murder or being manipulated just to justify radically motivated crimes. My group members and I still attend on meeting Vice Speaker Tina Munoz-Barnes and Senator Shelton.
This graph represents homicide rates in the United States from years 2000 through 2017. Strong evidence has linked Stand Your Ground laws with an increase in firearm homicide rates. No research found that Stand Your Ground laws prevent violent crimes. This translates to more than 150 additional gun deaths each month in the U.S. overall. 5 years before states began enacting these laws, years 2000 through 2004, to the 13-year period following the enactment, 2005 through 2017, found that justifiable firearm homicide rate increased by 55% in the states that have Stand Your Ground, while 20% in the states that do not have such laws. Overall homicide rates increased by 11% in Stand Your Ground states, yet decreased by 2% in states that did not have such laws. This graph represents the data.
Statistics. Florida is the first state that passed Stand Your Ground law. 57% of Florida's Stand Your Ground cases could have safely retreated to avoid confrontation. 63% of cases, victims were unarmed. Roughly 3 out of 5 people in Florida claiming Stand Your Ground had prior arrest. About a third had previously been arrested for serious crimes like assault or robbery. On this slide, we have 2 graphs that compare non-Stand Your Ground states and Stand Your Ground states with homicides that are real justified. For the all cases from 2005 to 2010, over 2.57% of homicides were rule justified, 1,365 out of 53,019. On the next slide, the Martin case attributes from 2005 to 2010 had a single victim and a single shooter. They are both male, they are strangers, and a firearm was used. The fact pattern occurred in 2,631 cases. A little history about Trayvon Martin's homicide is that it happened on February 6, 2012. Trayvon was shot to death by George Zimmerman in Sanford, Florida. He was found not guilty. He didn't claim stand your ground defense in this case. He did claim self-defense as a motivation for shooting. Jury was told about Florida's stand your ground law, and jurors discussed the law in deliberations. Based on both graphs, homicides in which white shooters kill black victims are deemed justifiable far more frequently than when the situation is in reverse.
How does stand your ground laws perpetuate racism? Minorities are implicitly associated with crime and danger. In stand your ground states, homicides are deemed justifiable 5 times more frequently than when the shooter is black and the victim is white. In Florida, stand your ground cases involving minority victims are half as likely to lead to conviction compared to cases involving white victims. According to Everytown Research and Policy, it is no accident that white people who shoot and kill black people out of fear are frequently given immunity.
What does this mean for Guam? It means increased tension between other Pacific Islanders and the minority groups on Guam, increased number of firearm homicides, and the Guam Police Department describes St. Augustine's original Stand Your Ground bill as a recipe for increased violence. According to Carmen Terlahi from Guam News Network, she reported that the legislation is an effort from preventing instances of gun violence from happening on Guam. Senators hope banning firearm stocks is a proactive measure and will protect the violence and to prevent the worst from happening in the territory.
Social work perspectives. The Wisconsin Act 94 of 2011 is an act that states use of force that is intended or likely to cause death or great bodily harm if the actor reasonably believed that the force was necessary to prevent imminent death or bodily harm to himself or herself or to another person. Under this original bill, the civil immunity applies and protects those who are public safety workers. Social workers were not made to be exempt from this law. Even though they face volatile and dangerous situations in complex environments where their safety is compromised. Social workers lobbied for support to have the profession be recognized to have the same level of respect and protections as the police, firefighters, and EMTs under this act. NASW Social Worker Safety. In more recent years, NASW has talked about ways that as social workers we can improve workplace safety. Shifting from the mindset of using force that is intended to kill if necessary, to training on what to do in a violent situation or how to defuse situations before they escalate, as National Association of Social Workers CEO Angela McLean has said. NASW has created guidelines for social work safety in the workplace. It contains ways that we can use our skills so that social workers stay safe and think about how to minimize the risk of violence in the workplace. The concern for the safety of social workers also led to the introduction of the Protecting Social Workers and Health Professionals from Workplace Violence Act of 2019. It helps fund and implement safety measures and safety training programs. It allows workplace safety, preventing workplace violence that provides a healing environment for clients. Though we want safety for social workers in the field, we also want to emphasize that we do want safety among all communities. The perspective on the expansion affects everyone, and how the mindset should be to minimize the potential harm to bystanders and public, and promoting and supporting anti-violence in our communities. Social justice. In the NASW Code of Ethics, one of the values and principles is social justice. As social workers, we challenge forms of social injustice, and in terms of expanding the castle doctrine under social justice, we want to prevent violence based on stereotypes and racism, which there is a potential for stand your ground to be abused and invoke racially motivated crimes.
Our next advocacy steps include meeting with Senator St. Augustine. We also plan to follow updates about the public hearing date, and we intend to provide testimony about opposing the bill during the public hearing.
Lastly, here is a list of our references, and we would like to thank you all for your time.
All right, thank you for that presentation. All right, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and put in the chat. And I'll go ahead with the first question right here from Raymond Shinohara. He asks, why was there no interviews from the perspective of regulatory agencies, i.e. the police department? The group is welcome to answer. You can turn on your mics and your videos.
So we did interview people from like the agencies and police department, and we mostly use those interviews for like our for and against arguments, and a lot of them wanted to also remain anonymous.
All right, thank you for your answer. Next, Patience Arturo asked the question, why did your group identify those specific senators?
Thank you, Patience. So initially, my group actually got in contact with a few senators. Majority of them couldn't get with us beforehand because they had session this past week. So we were able to interview these senators who were able to get back to us.
All right, thank you for your answer. If anyone else has any further questions, go ahead and leave them in the chat. Okay, I see another one from Arthur Paulino. What was a major highlight you took from this advocacy project?
So sorry, I can answer, but the major highlight was that it kind of shifted what we thought the bill was. We just kept thinking in the beginning that, you know, we can just fight, we can do whatever we want to do. But through research, we learned that there are laws and there are steps on how the law is interpreted.
All right, I see another question here from Samantha Zamora. What were their reactions after interviewing those departments, and in parentheses, the police department?
Hi, Zam. So the police officers, I mean, they made a good point that the stand your ground kind of, it puts the people at risk, you know, and they feel that it could increase, you know, putting people at risk in the community, when in reality, that's the police officer's job. So they had mixed feelings about it, to be honest.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer and also for your question. Something that your presentation mentioned is the strategy of preventing a violent situation and working towards like a peaceful kind of resolution. So what are some strategies that you think would be better to use instead in the event of, you know, threat of harm or anything like that?
Well, I think like, you know, like we're taught like to diffuse situations, you know, try and calm people down and like, you know, talk to them instead of just immediately acting like to, I guess, like to defend yourself. Like, so, you know, strategies to like really like talk with people, like, you know, understand like maybe like why they feel the need to like feel angry or like why they're acting the way they are. So instead of like just immediately acting to defend yourself, we want to understand and like help calm people down. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that does. That's a good answer. Yeah, I feel like nowadays sometimes people can get a little reactionary. So that is like a good, that's good advice to follow. So does anyone else have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. All right, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next presentation. It's called Putehi Texan Save Virginia.
Buenas and half a day, everyone. My name is Arthur William Paulino.
I am Aaliyah Alvarez.
I'm Cesar Villanueva Jr.
I'm Corey Yuggen.
I'm Raíssa Nicholas.
And I am Samantha Zamora, and we will be presenting on Putehi Texan Save Virginian, Putehi Zan Defendi, standing with PLSR to protect and defend Indigenous rights.
Putehi Texan Save Virginian is a direct action group dedicated to the protection of natural and cultural resources in all sites identified for DoD live fire training on Guam, opposes the establishment of any military firing range, stands in solidarity with other organizations within the Marianas by preventing environmental degradation and destruction on sacred and native lands, and promotes the continued pursuit for return of ancestral lands. As part of our advocacy efforts with PLSR, we were tasked to review the programmatic agreement for training and testing. The programmatic agreement is an agreement made between the Department of Defense and Guam State Historic Preservation Office. It outlines the management for protection of historic and culturally significant sites while training and testing activities for military readiness take place. We are advocating for this cause because we wanted to educate the people of Guam about the devastating effects that the live firing training range complex would have on sacred and native lands. We want to protect and preserve our natural and cultural resources.
Before we dive into our advocacy effort, we would like to discuss a brief history of the programmatic agreement. In 2019, the 2009 programmatic agreement expired, which gave way for the development of a new agreement. A draft of the new programmatic agreement was finished in late 2019. Almost a year later, the final version of the new programmatic agreement, which supposedly outlines how the negative impacts of the training and testing on cultural and historic sites will be minimized, was signed on December 29, 2019. However, it's important to note that the only way for the public to provide input was by sending their comments via email to the State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO. No public hearing was held before the signing. So we as a group were able to view the letter from Dr. Tom King provided to us by PLSR, who received it from Senator Kelly Marsh Titano. It discusses his perspective on the PA military training and testing. And as stated in his letter, the agency and regulated project would inevitably use them to narrowly constrain review until it could do no good, excluding interested parties from participating in reviewing projects that might affect them. This indicates that the PA's tactic in holding and putting reviews off until they are no longer useful along the way goes against Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act and the sole purpose of PA. And an example of this would be Latexan and how they were not provided input nor a public hearing.
Now we will begin to discuss our key points related to the cause. The following are the points of concern that our team developed when researching the programmatic agreement December 2020.
Okay, so our first point, in the section of the programmatic agreement titled Training and Testing Requiring Further Consultation, the parties make 2 points. The first is that Joint Regions Marianas will consult the Guam State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, for new testing not listed in Appendix A, or the original list of tests and trainings that are planned that can affect historical sites. The second is that they will notify SHPO before the proposed testing or training begins. Although the Department of Defense stated that they will notify the State Historic Preservation Office, there is no indication that they will inform the public about the new testing they want to perform, nor will the public be given the chance to voice their thoughts or concerns. Additionally, the agreement does not outline what will happen if SHPO opposes conducting these new training or testing sessions, or whether the training or test will be stopped if SHPO opposes them.
Section 8 of the programmatic agreement talks about new discoveries and emergencies that could potentially come up during the military activities. Any new discoveries that are found and eligible for listing on the National Registry of Historic Places, the Commander Joint Region Marianas will develop a treatment plan with SHPO to consult what actions will take place in regard to treating the new discoveries. As for our point, the public, most especially the original landowners of Latexan, should also have the right to review and comment on the treatment plan that is developed by the Commander Joint Region Marianas. There is no indication on the programmatic agreement to allow the public to input their comments and review the treatment plan.
Based on an article posted on the Pacific Daily News, the military had failed to inform SHPO on the disastrous effects that can happen amongst the artifacts in Ritidian, not abiding by the National Historic Preservation Act. The National Historic Preservation Act is one of Guam's few policy tools that has the potential to put us on equal footing with the military in regard to protecting our heritage, such as our land and ancient artifacts that can be found on our island. The National Historic Preservation Act and SHPO is also responsible for making assertive decisions and negotiations in regards to our land and heritage. Because the military failed to inform SHPO about the possible harmful outcomes that may happen to the artifacts in Ritidian and to the land itself, they did not abide by the National Historic Preservation Act, therefore leading me to my point on the importance of reinforcing rules and regulations when discovering artifacts on our island. Next slide, please. The programmatic agreement has a problematic clause where SHPO cannot reveal any information on the cultural resources uncovered during the construction or live firing training to the people of Guam. Military refused to meet with SHPO and fails to provide any types of forum to further discuss to the people of Guam about their plans. As stated in the article, the military also admits in the programmatic agreement that cultural resources will be affected, but fails to further provide evidence of or information on what exactly will be affected in Ritidian. There was no meaningful dialogue for a free exchange of information and lacked sufficient information on the military training and impact on our cultural resources. If this can happen to land of Ritidian, can you imagine other sacred lands in Guam that this can happen to? Which is why it is important that we reinforce these rules and regulations when discovering sacred artifacts on our island.
So our advocacy goal, we set out a short-term, intermediate, and long-term goal that we strive to achieve towards our involvement in PLSR. Our short-term goal consists of us conducting research and educating ourselves more about the cause while working closely with PLSR in understanding the root issue that perpetuates the progress of PLSR. Our intermediate goal is to distill research and information for the public consumption and making it more easily comprehensible from any jargon. With the information gathered, we plan to compile our findings and share them through infographics that we will create. It will consist of the main points of concerns surrounding the programmatic agreement. In providing this information to the public, we hope to help them understand the reasons for PLSR, protests against the LFTR that will contribute to the environmental degradation and deconstruction of sacred and native lands. Lastly, our long-term goal is to help PLSR keep Ritidian without federal intervention, preserving Ritidian and ensuring that another part of our land is not stripped from its natural resources.
With any advocacy effort, it is important to first identify any opposition. In this project, our parties of opposition are persons who may need more knowledge, who are neutral or indifferent or apathetic, and who are in clear disagreement with the cause. There are 3 categories of tactics that are effective in addressing the resistance from the opposition. These categories are collaborative tactics, campaign tactics, and contest tactics. Under collaborative tactics, our plans include conducting research on the programmatic agreement, archiving news articles about military activities on Lake Texan, and developing fact sheets. Under campaign tactics, we have sharing our concerns about the programmatic agreement via social media, assisting with a letter writing campaign, and interviewing PLSR partners and combining their testimonials. Lastly, under contest tactics, we will participate in protests.
The 2 forums that were utilized in this movement were participating in the PLSR protests and creating content for PLSR social media platforms. In promoting this movement, we are providing accessible information to the public and spreading awareness about Indigenous rights and preserving Guahan's cultural resources. Additionally, part of creating content for PLSR social media platforms allows us to reinforce PLSR's mission.
The social perspectives that we find fitting that reflects the NASW social policy is on respecting the dignity and worth of a person. Ritidian is not just land, but it belongs to Chamorro families that have waited decades for its return to them. It is essential to their security, well-being, and identity. More importantly, it is their home. Stripping an individual and families from their land is disrespecting one's worth and their values that is bestowed on that land, therefore not respecting one's dignity and worth. And we should not forget that one's dignity and worth can also constitute to one's land as well. Another social perspective to look at as social workers is practicing cultural competency and cultural sensitivity. Understanding that the reasons why we choose to take on this role of protecting our land right for Chamorro on a cultural level based on cultural beliefs, values, and practices. Next slide, please. By applying Indigenous rights to the NASW policy, one policy statement that was fitting in the Social Work Speaks text was on a statement that addressed education and training of all social workers on cultural competence, specifically with regard to value differences between the dominant culture and the cultures of Indigenous peoples and the various social determinants that influence the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples, stating that as social workers, we should be well aware of the values that we have on our island with our land rights and the culture of our people, but also being aware of the values that the dominant culture, such as the military, holds as well, and to never forget the values that we hold on our land and culture, so that we can continue to educate those who do not agree with our values, such as protecting our sacred land. For those wondering why we young social work students are taking a stand with Protehila Tetsan on saving Ritidian, it is because we are not just fighting for ourselves today, but we are also a voice for our Chamorro ancestors who cultivated and prepared our land before us. If our people on Guam are of important value, so to speak, so should our land be of even greater significance to preserve this resource for our future generations to come.
These are some of our next advocacy steps. First, stay informed. It is important to stay informed on the issue and why it matters. The more knowledgeable we are on the subject, the better prepared we will be to engage in debates and ultimately increase awareness. Second, we will continue to build public awareness, such as through peaceful protests. Public education and awareness is critical to the implementation of Indigenous rights. How we inform ourselves and understand our own involvement in consumption and policies that sustain the need for production, profit, and exploitation is necessary. From there, we can begin to understand the impact on Indigenous peoples and their lands. For those who are not Indigenous and call Guahan home, standing up for the preservation of the land and a healthy environment for future generations is so important. Our actions today will result in the world that future generations will inherit. As an Indigenous person, our relationship to the land is the heart and soul of who we are, our identity, and our survival. Some other steps would be developing a fact sheet, interviewing PLSR partners and combined testimonials, and archiving news articles that contain information regarding Liteksan.
Thank you so much for listening to us today. Here are our references. And if you have any more questions or any questions at all, so it's the time to do so now.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. You guys can go ahead and leave a question for the group for the sake of time. Maybe we'll have one question for this group. If anyone is willing to ask a question, just leave it in the chat and we'll go ahead and have the group answer it.
I believe there's already one question that's asked in the group chat.
Okay, let me see. Is the PA only for the firing range or is there another for the land/historical site?
Hi, Ru. Thank you so much for your question. It's a brilliant question to ask, actually. And so, no, the PA is not just for the firing range, but it can be also for other possible historical sites, historical places on Guam that might be affected as well in the future through the military activities and projects. So yes, thank you for that question to clarify.
And we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the last group of this track. So up next is a presentation called Cause Advocacy, Heart But No Home.
Buenas and Hafade. Our presentation for today is Mana Adzuda Comunidad, meaning to assist by cooperation and working willingly with each other for a common goal. We are social work students working with the Guam Homeless Coalition, advocating for individuals experiencing homelessness on Guam. Our presenters for today are Jada Aldon, Patience Artero, Caitlin Kama, Candice Libria, Stephanie Lorenzo, Audrey Venus Mendiola, Andrew Moiko, Jeannie Newby, Sharon Park, Haani Nicholas, Joni Tadella, and Carisis Victus.
Homelessness can be defined as the following: any individual or family who lacks a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. They would be living out of their vehicles, parks, abandoned buildings, camping grounds, bus stops, or etc. Or any individual or family living in a shelter designed to provide temporary living arrangements. Or any individual or family who is attempting to flee domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, or other life-threatening conditions. They would have no other residence and lack support from family and friends to help obtain permanent housing. Some causes and risk factors of homelessness include insufficient income, lack of affordable housing, unemployment, poverty, lack of services, lack of education, domestic violence, abuse and neglect, substance abuse, and mental illness.
As of the 2019 Guam point-in-time homeless count statistics, there were a total of 875 homeless persons. Of that total, 112 were family households, 23 were veterans, 14 were unaccompanied young adults aged 18 to 24, and 84 were individuals experiencing chronic homelessness, as stated in the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. In addition, 765 were unsheltered and 108 were sheltered, as stated in the Guam Homeless Coalition's preliminary results of 2019 homeless count. This data will help us understand the needs and circumstances of people affected by homelessness in our community and bring awareness.
On Guam, there are several agencies and organizations that provide services to persons experiencing homelessness. To name a few, they are Catholic Social Service, Office of Homelessness Assistance and Poverty Prevention, GURA, the Salvation Army, Sanctuary Incorporated of Guam, and Kamalan Karadat. These agencies and organizations operate shelters, provide temporary or emergency housing, or extend supportive services such as food and clothing distribution, or provide assistance for healthcare needs.
Our advocacy goals. For our short-term goals, interview and record key administrators for Telethon. Organize and moderate documentary on homelessness titled Heart But No Home. And create website content for the Guam Homeless Coalition. Our intermediate goals. Bring awareness to community about homelessness and educate public about services for homeless individuals and families. Our long-term goals, reduce homelessness on Guam and improve access to services.
Another advocacy goal is to interview administrators and stakeholders who head agencies that provide services to individuals who are homeless. We will be asking questions such as, what services, programs, or resources do your agency provide to individuals that are homeless? By estimation, how many homeless individuals does your agency serve per year? And what challenges does your agency have when serving those who are homeless? Another advocacy goal is to research and create content to include in the website. This will include our most updated PIC count statistics and inclusive of a tab of all different agencies that provide services to homeless individuals or Link Pacific Region resource.
Strategies and tactics. In order to achieve our goals, our class agreed that the best approach would be through collaborative strategies, specifically to interview key administrators and stakeholders. This includes the following: Catholic Social Services, Kamalan Karadat, Oasis Empowerment, OHAP, Lighthouse Recovery Center, Guam Regional Transit, Gumamami, Salvation Army, Department of Education, and West Care Pacific Island. In order to identify these key stakeholders, our tactics were to conduct studies, analysis,
and surveys. Create fact sheets. Share data with key stakeholders and at the NASW conference. Create website content and serve as a partisan. Through these actions, we aim to achieve our goals of reducing homelessness on Guam and improving access to services. Our presentation at the NASW Annual Conference is an opportunity to expand educational outreach to members in the community who may work directly with individuals experiencing homelessness. Also, the NASW Conference is to help influence people in power. This forum can be in a variety of settings and is not limited to governmental institutions. Key points of this forum is to educate, to persuade, and to deliberate. Presentation at the NASW is in hopes to discuss and educate key individuals about the ongoing crisis of homelessness, as well as to create content for a future telethon by interviewing service providers and other key administrators to increase public awareness and contradict stigma around homelessness. As part of our group advocacy project, the use of a forum will provide opportunities for awareness, raise concerns, and express viewpoints. This will allow for conversations to happen, discuss recommendations, and receive feedback from key stakeholders and administrators who are people in power that can create change on behalf of the client population experiencing homelessness. We also will be including recordings of interviews with various key administrators. The use of the interviews will be to gather thoughts and feedback about service delivery and competency, then will be broadcasted in a telethon. Shown on the screen is the NASW Code of Ethics Preamble, and according to this preamble, our mission as social workers is to enhance human well-being and help meet the basic human needs of all people, but most especially to help those who are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty, all of which are characteristics that help describe people experiencing homelessness. Therefore, based on the preamble, we are mandated to address this issue. It is important to note the last sentence of the first paragraph, which reads, "Fundamental to social work is attention to the environmental forces that create, contribute to, and address problems in living." As we all know, environmental forces play a major role in the issue of homelessness. Examples of these environmental factors include access to healthcare, affordable housing, employment, and so on. So, from a social work perspective, we must address various environmental factors surrounding homelessness to ultimately end homelessness.
According to the Social Work Speaks 11th edition, the issue of homelessness is complex. The only common factor amongst those in homeless situations is that they do not have a safe, decent, and affordable place to live. As mentioned in the policy statement, NASW advocates for the following: greater investment in housing strategies that reduce homelessness, including rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and housing first models, as well as the expansion of education, job training, and related support services to prevent homelessness and promote housing stabilization and maintenance. As mentioned in a previous slide and following these policy statements, our advocacy goals are to bring awareness to the community, educate the public on the issue, improve access to services, and reduce homelessness on Guam.
To conclude, here are some advocacy steps to take when engaging with homeless individuals. First, we can look into policy and legislation. Engaging in policy may include declaring homelessness as an emergency so Guam can be eligible for federal aid. In working with policymakers, you could also build relationships with them. Through the collaboration of yourself and policymakers, this will help build a foundation in making the change you want a reality. Lastly, voting for legislators who help the homeless population is another benefit.
Working with legislators also helps us represent the voice of the needs of the homeless. This will enable us to gain more support and attention to the bigger community regarding the dynamic idea of homelessness. As times is changing and never constant, we want to be able to voice out the current situation that is happening in the island, as well as bring it to the attention of the legislators in a closer manner.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. Although it's already 5 o'clock, I'll go ahead and let there be one question. Does anyone have any questions for the group? Okay, I see a question from Arthur Paulino. As a group, what are some other factors that can lead to homelessness rather than environmental factors?
Hi, hello, this is Audrey Mendiola. Okay, thank you, Arthur, for your question. For our advocacy goals here, we are working with the Homeless Coalition, and some other factors besides environmental factors that individuals have expressed with us in collaboration is access to resources such as obtaining identification. But those are not leading to those factors. Those are just some difficulties that they are facing when trying to obtain jobs.
All right, thank you very much for your answer. And with that, I'd like to say this is the conclusion of your track today for the social work cohort. Thank you very much for your presentations. It was really informative and you guys did a really, really good job. All four of you. As a reminder, thank you for joining us for day one of the 2021 Social Work Regional Training Conference. As a reminder, the conference will resume tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And to access the conference, you can use your same Zoom link, and we look forward to seeing you. All right, thank you everybody and have a good day.